one decision can damage a nation. From the Iraq War, drone strikes, to the election that shattered trust, these are every president's major mistakes. George Washington is remembered as a man who guided America through the tough initial years. People hailed him as a king. They wanted him to continue, but he stepped down after 2 terms. And his biggest mistake was something he never did. Washington hated slavery, but that hatred was limited only to his private life. In his will, he wrote for his enslaved workers to be free after his wife's death, but publicly he never spoke against slavery. He knew slavery was detrimental to basic human rights, but he also knew people who possessed slaves also possessed influence and power. And standing against power was the last thing he wanted. Most people later argue that Washington had that knack to persuade. He had that influence. And if he had openly condemned slavery at the time, the issue could have been solved decades earlier. Washington chose political unity and preserved stability in the short term, but the long-term consequences were inevitable, which later turned into the Civil War. If Washington's silence set the tone, John Adams proved how quickly fear could test the freedoms he helped establish. John Adams took office in 1797. To make the country internally stronger, Adams signed the Alien and Sedition Acts in 1798. These laws made it almost impossible for immigrants to become citizens, and deportation without a proper trial was made easier. But these weren't the only notorious provisions. The most controversial was the power of the government to criminalize the federal government. Adams labeled it as protection to national security, but in doing so, he directly contradicted freedom of speech. Instead of making America strong, the laws made it look weak, but it wasn't able to stand public criticism. Adams lost confidence, and then the 1800 election. In trying to silence critics, Adams proved that fear can push even a founder to contradict the freedoms he helped create. Then came Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson is known as the champion of liberty, but even he fumbled. In 1807, Jefferson enacted the Embargo Act. This was to protect American ships from Britain and France during the Napoleonic Wars. The act banned American ships from trading with foreign nations. Doing this, Jefferson hoped, would economically pressure Britain and France to respect the U.S. The idea was clever, but practically it proved disastrous. The American export market crashed, businesses went bankrupt, and the entire economy suffered. Instead of pressuring Europe, the Embargo Act shattered the American economy. Jefferson had to pay a huge price politically. He lost his reputation and got criticized really harshly. The act was repealed in 1809, but the damage stayed even after years. Jefferson's Embargo Act was disastrous, but the next president was about to gamble with war. The father of the Constitution, James Madison, faced a tough challenge in the initial years of his presidency. His biggest mistake was to lead the United States into the War of 1812 without any preparation. The country wasn't getting along with Britain. The pressure kept mounting, and Madison felt war was the only option to assert American sovereignty. Yet, he underestimated the risks. The military wasn't trained enough, didn't have enough equipment, and the economy wasn't ready to fund a war. Opponents labeled it Mr. Madison's War, blaming the president for his reckless leadership. The war exposed America's vulnerabilities. Madison wasn't to declare a war, but the failure to prepare adequately politically and militarily. After Madison shook the nation, Monroe stepped in only to postpone the bigger fight. James Monroe's presidency was known as the era of good feelings. But beneath those good feelings, one issue was quietly tearing the nation apart. It was none other than the growth of the slavery culture. Monroe's biggest mistake was the Missouri Compromise. Missouri wanted to join the U.S. as a slave state, but allowing it would create an imbalance because there was an equal number of free and slave states in Congress. To address this, Missouri was entered as a slave state and Maine as a free state to maintain the balance. A line was drawn across the Louisiana Territory. North of that line, slavery wouldn't be allowed. South of it, slavery could continue. By allowing slavery at one end of the line, this idea turned it into a geographic and political battle. And that line would lead America to the Civil War decades later. Monroe maintained stability for a while, but John Quincy Adams soon came up with policies that tore the country apart. His worst decision was a policy he made to achieve that success, the Tariff of 1828. It placed high taxes on imported goods to protect American manufacturers. Theoretically, the tariffs were meant to boost U.S. industry. However, the results were completely different, as it favored only the northern region. The southern states relied heavily on imported goods and on exporting cotton to foreign markets. Higher tariffs meant higher costs, leading to lower margins. The whole southern region believed the federal government was favoring northern interests, while pushing them to the edge. The tariffs later led to the nullification crisis, where states argued they could reject federal laws they believed were unconstitutional. Although the crisis fully exploded under Andrew Jackson, the resentment was built during Adams' presidency. His support for a strong federal government and economic nationalism made him look disconnected from Southern concerns. After Adams' tariff fueled sectional anger, Jackson's policies resulted in huge humanitarian and economic losses. Andrew Jackson built his image as the man for the common people. He wanted to challenge the elites who dominated American politics and the economy. But his biggest mistake destroyed his reputation. Jackson urged Congress to pass a law to force Native American tribes in the Southeast to migrate to the area west of the Mississippi River. And even after the Supreme Court ruled against it, Jackson refused to listen. What followed was the Trail of Tears. Around 60,000 people marched west under brutal conditions. Thousands of them died before they even reached their destinations. Jackson argued that removal was necessary for expansion and security. His supporters sided with him by saying the removal opened land for settlement and strengthened the economy. But it came at the cost of broken treaties, lost homes, and countless lives. After the 9/11 attacks, Bush launched the War on Terror with the intention of sweeping out Al-Qaeda and the Taliban in Afghanistan. But in 2003, his focus turned to Iraq. Bush said that Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction, and hence was an imminent threat. Those weapons were never found. The invasion was successful, but maybe it wasn't worth it. Thousands of American soldiers were killed, while hundreds of thousands of Iraqis died. The financial cost was staggering. Trillions of dollars were spent, but the human cost was even greater and also irrecoverable. Donald Trump's worst mistake came after losing the 2020 election to Joe Biden, when Trump continued to challenge the results and urged supporters to fight. He repeatedly claimed that the elections had been rigged. Multiple court cases were filed, but no evidence was ever found. On the 6th of January 2021, a mob stormed the U.S. Capitol. Several people died in the chaos. No modern president had directly challenged the peaceful transfer of power in this way. Joe Biden's biggest mistake came in August 2021, and it was the withdrawal from Afghanistan. To be clear, Biden didn't start the war. It began under George W. Bush and dragged on for 20 years under multiple presidents. A withdrawal deal had been already negotiated by Trump, and Biden chose to follow through. As U.S. officials left, the Taliban took Kabul in a few days. During the evacuation, a suicide bomber killed 13 U.S. service members and over 170 Afghan civilians. The war ended, but not how it was meant to end. It damaged America's global image and raised serious questions about intelligence assessments and planning. Biden fulfilled his promise to end America's longest war, but the disorderly withdrawal became the defining crisis of his presidency.